Students, welcome to the 1960s review. Let's get groovy, baby. Yeah! Here we are to talk about the decade that was the 1960s. We start things off with a presidential election between the former Vice President Richard Milhouse Nixon and the super young, super sexy Senator from Massachusetts, John Fitzgerald Kennedy. It's a battle for the ages, one of the closest elections ever to take place. It's boyish good looks versus this. This election was, in fact, decided by one brand new medium known as the television. This was evident in the 1960 presidential election, where instead of consulting with political heads, John Kennedy instead opted to talk to television producers to prepare him for the debate.
Good evening. The television stations of the United States are proud to provide facilities for a discussion of issues by the two major candidates for the presidency.
It was the boyish, good-looking John F. Kennedy that successfully harnessed the power of television and used it to propel him to the White House. At the debate, Kennedy wore a nice crisp blue suit to stand out against the gray backdrop, along with wearing makeup and looking tan. On the other hand, Mr. Nixon tried to match the background of the debate and decided that an entire day's worth of campaign events was great preparation. Way to go, Dick.
Sock it to me?
He also was just recovering from the flu and had also slammed his knee into a car door recently because he's 4 years old, apparently. People who watched the debate easily declared that Kennedy had won. However, those that listened on the radio said that Nixon was the winner.
Nixon always wins!
Studies have shown that simple TV debate was responsible for shifting 3+ million votes towards Kennedy and eventually leading to his victory in the 1960 presidential election. This is not the only election that TV has clearly played a role, but it is looked at as the beginning. And as he's elected, he tells the country to ask not
what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
A plea to the younger generation to live a life of service and to make our country better. He did so by creating things like the Peace Corps, which was an organization that went around the world helping build roads, schools, and other infrastructure for developing countries. This, of course, was also a strategy to gain allies during the Cold War, which was now in full swing. Kennedy was also successful in expanding roles for women within the government, securing funding for the disabled and helping create the Special Olympics, along with securing funding for space exploration, eventually leading to us landing on the moon.
That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind.
Aside from JFK's domestic policy successes, it was his foreign policy that makes him more notable. As he became president, he was responsible for executing the failed Bay of Pigs invasion, a military operation that was greenlit under the Eisenhower administration and carried out in the early months of the Kennedy presidency. The invasion was a complete disaster from which Kennedy learned from, which led to Kennedy's deep distrust in military advisors and forcing him to rely on his own pragmatic problem-solving ability.
It's a catastrophe. The 1 hour of air support that I ordered got screwed up. The 2 units didn't connect because of a 1 hour time difference. These incompetent son of a bitches, they can't even tell time. I don't know why I ever listened to him.
You couldn't have known.
The president should know. How could I be so stupid?
Jack, you're being too hard on yourself.
Well, they said it. Said I was too young, too soft. Not communism. And I told them I was ready. And they trusted me.
They still do.
There are men dying on those beaches. Right now. I'm supposed to be the most powerful man in the world, and I'm impotent. Well, I'll tell you what. This is the last time anyone's going to make a decision like that for me.
Kennedy would be tested many times throughout his short presidency. Not only was the Bay of Pigs invasion a failure, but also during his presidency, the Berlin Wall was constructed. Kennedy's response was to fly to Berlin and give a rousing speech to the Berliners of the West Side.
On June the 26th, a short distance from the wall and overlooking the east, the people of West Berlin welcomed a visitor, the President of the United States of America.
There are many people in the world who really don't understand, or say they don't, what is the great issue between the free world and the communist world. Let them come to Berlin.
His most successful foreign policy victory comes also from the country of Cuba, after the United States discovered that the Soviets were indeed placing nuclear missiles within the country. Kennedy orders a quarantine, which creates a moment of tenseness around the world. It is probably the closest we have come to destroying the entire world with nuclear bombs. However, the two leaders of the countries, Kennedy and Khrushchev of the Soviet Union, diplomatically settle the issue, while the U.S. takes its missiles out of Turkey and Italy and promises to never invade Cuba. The Soviets withdraw their missiles. Crisis averted! Shortly after the Cuban Missile Crisis, John F. Kennedy was preparing for his re-election bid in 1964 when he decided to take a trip to Dallas.
Won't you help me when I call? Yeah, big boss man. Won't you help me when I call? Well, you ain't so big. You just tall and that's all.
It was in Dallas during a campaign stop and parade through Dealey Plaza where an assassin's bullets cut down the president.
This bulletin just into the KILT News Terminal. Daylight Dallas, 3 shots were fired at the motorcade of President Kennedy's day in downtown Dallas.
Police radios are carrying that the president has been hit. Parkland Hospital has been advised to stand by for a severe gunshot wound.
This is Walter Cronkite in our newsroom. There has been an attempt on the life of President Kennedy.
Lee Harvey Oswald from the 3rd floor of the School Book Depository in Dealey Plaza murdered President Kennedy, and he also murdered a Dallas police officer, J.D. Tibbetts, where he was finally arrested in a movie theater and taken into custody. After Oswald was placed in custody and interrogated during a transfer to a county jail, he was murdered by nightclub owner Jack Ruby.
There is a person. There is He's been shot. He's been shot.
Oswald's death, along with President Kennedy's death, still remain a mystery in the eyes of some. Some believing that Kennedy was never killed by Oswald, and that Oswald was killed to shut him up from telling the truth. This moment in American history is the beginning of America's distrust of our government, which continues to this day. Other impacts of this assassination were that media coverage became a much more immediate affair. This was the first event in American history which garnered 24/7 media coverage, with various local and national media outlets giving updates and new facts on the case as they were made available. It also leads to the development of conspiracy theories surrounding who killed the president. Some believed it was the mafia. Some believed it was the Cubans. Some thought it was LBJ. Some people thought it was Umbrella Man. The final impact of this assassination was that the Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson took over for President Kennedy. Lyndon B. Johnson was quite a colorful character.
Hello. Hello. Now, another thing, the crotch down where your nuts hang is always a little too tight. So when you make them up, give me an inch that I can let out there, because they cut me. They're just like riding a wire fence.
Former Senate Majority Leader, the new president knew how to get things done, and he usually did it using some pretty interesting tactics.
If I'm going to make a run in 68, well, I'm going to need people to fucking like me. Shut the door.
How could anybody not like him?
Oh, the man was very egotistical. A former rural school teacher in Texas, Johnson grew up around many poor families, leading him to create things like the War on Poverty and the Great Society.
For in your time, we have the opportunity to move not only toward the rich society and the powerful society, but upward to the Great Society. The Great Society rests on abundance and liberty for all. It demands an end to poverty and racial injustice, to which we're totally committed in our time.
His idea was that creating a base level of support for America's most vulnerable population, we would see great growth, culturally and economically. His legislative statistics are very impressive. He was 96% effective when trying to pass bills. However, his Great Society, which created things like Medicare, Medicaid, Project Head Start, the Clean Air and Water Act, along with many others, ended up going bankrupt due to Johnson's involvement in the Vietnam War, which took precedence over the domestic programs because Johnson refused to lose the war, even though it didn't work. We lost. And the Warren Court in the 1960s expanded many basic rights for all Americans. In the area of voting, the Supreme Court adopted the principle of one person, one vote, making sure that each political district was even in terms of population, and that political districts were redrawn based on good, solid U.S. Census numbers. In the area of privacy, it was required that police could not enter a home or gather evidence without a specific search warrant, and when gathered without one, that evidence was inadmissible in court. They also ruled that it was appropriate for married women to buy birth control legally. In the area of due process, the Supreme Court decided that, hey, you can have a lawyer if you can't afford one, you can see your lawyer when you're getting interrogated, and that you have the right to remain silent, and you have the right to those rights being read to you if you are being arrested. They also ruled on the issue of prayer in school, deciding that it was unconstitutional to require public school students to recite prayers specific to a certain religion, and also for students to read Bibles in school. So there you have it, the groovy 60s in a nutshell. Stay tuned for more from my garage by subscribing and liking this video, and also doing your homework. My work is done here.
I give you the next president of Earth.
Nixon's back!